From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And ahead today from Oklahoma State University, Derrell with this week's insight on the cattle markets. Among other things, he'll review the 2019 beef trade data, which was just released, and how that sets up the trade outlook for 2020. Also today, K-State's A.J. Tarpoff with advice on preparing for intervention when calving difficulties turn up. He'll talk about what he calls the cooler kit that you producers can put together for calving assistance when necessary. And later, Jeff Wickman with this week's 4-H segment. He'll talk with K-State's Anissa Jepsen about two things: the upcoming Science of Agriculture Challenge and My Preparedness Initiative. All that and more straight ahead on Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
This is Agriculture Today from the campus of Kansas State University. Thanks for being along with us as we open up this Monday edition on the cattle markets and get thoughts from our guest out of Stillwater, Oklahoma, livestock economist with Oklahoma State University, Derrell, who's with us routinely right here. So, Derrell, last week's market action, another week where the fed cattle trade pulled back another $1 this time around. So there's a mini trend in place here. Is this anything that producers should be concerned about to any extent?
Well, I don't know that this is a major trend in the market. I think there's several things going on right now. Obviously, cattle markets, both cash and futures markets, have been rocked a little bit by the coronavirus thing that's affecting global markets. And that's mostly a case of uncertainty, so we have to kind of wait and see whether that turns into a bigger deal or it goes away at some point here, or at least largely goes away. So that's one issue. The other thing is that, feedlots are a little bit front-loaded here going into the first quarter of the year. That said, of course, we normally seasonally expect, stronger prices through the first quarter. So I think this will probably play out here, and we'll get back onto a seasonal trend of at least somewhat stronger prices as we move forward from here.
You brought it up, though, and it seems to be woven into everything when we discuss the economic situation out there. The coronavirus, well, it's still a huge concern from the human health standpoint, but the worries over the economic impact of that, are they starting to temper some, do you think, after the initial shock of this thing?
Well, I think to some extent they have, although, the stuff I read would suggest that we have not yet sort of gotten a handle on this. I think it's continuing to get worse as a human health thing. It's still not reached the point where I think you would call it a global, pandemic or anything like a major global health event. It's still unknown at this point. So, but the initial shock, of course, futures markets in particular for feeder cattle and fed cattle were somewhat overbought anyway, and kind of looking for an excuse to correct. And this certainly provided that, and so we probably overdid that correction, as we often do a little bit, and so we're stabilizing from that now. So, again, short-run stability probably, and really a bit of recovery from the initial shock, but yet still keeping an eye on a very uncertain situation at this point.
Well, we haven't had the opportunity to visit with you since that cattle inventory report was released late January. What's your take on those numbers, herd expansion, lack thereof, to be more precise, in 2020?
Well, again, it really doesn't change my perspective a lot. Clearly the numbers officially say that 2019 was the peak in cattle numbers. We're a little bit lower going into 2020, but it's not a major liquidation, and I don't think it indicates that we're in a major liquidation in a cyclical sense. It's really more, again, I've been describing it as a plateau for several months And I think that's still pretty much the case at this point. And I think what it suggests is that we kind of move sideways here in 2020 with these inventories, and then market conditions as we go forward from here, sort of to be determined, will in fact set the stage for where we go from here. We could pick up and continue expansion if we tap into some global market potential that's clearly out there, or it could turn into a liquidation if, in fact, various negative events really take a hold of this market.
But if there were to be another expansion, would that not come at a rather slow pace? Producers would be rather cautious about going willy-nilly into greater numbers?
I think that's probably correct. We're looking for somewhat stronger cattle markets this year, a little bit of improved profitability pretty much across the industry. So, again, I think that will temper our tendencies to liquidate, but I don't think it in and of itself would suggest a major amount of expansion, potential at this point. So, yeah, I believe the market will kind of take it in stride, and if we do move forward, it would be in a fairly measured pace.
Well, you say we've in hand now the summary on beef trade data for 2019. That was just released. What did that tell us, and what does it portend for 2020, do you think?
Well, I think in a very broad sense or aggregate sense, beef exports were down about 4.4% on a year-over-year basis in 2019. Now that we have the December data to complete last year's data, imports were up about 2%. So both of those, on the face of it, are negative. They're not majorly negative in some sense. And I think going forward, we have expectations that both of those will probably go back the other way this year in 2020, with exports resuming a little bit. Again, we do have improved trade potential with a new agreement in place in Japan to sort of reestablish a better competitive position there. Potential in China, even though that's liable to be a somewhat measured growth, but I think there's lots of potential there. And then at the same time on the import side, two things are going on. One is, major exporters like Australia are being restricted because of drought and wildfire impacts. And in general, China, because of its new position as the leading beef importing country in the world, is redirecting a lot of beef flows towards China, particularly enhanced by ASF, African swine fever impacts. And so the U.S. is liable to import less beef as a result of all of those things.
You mentioned something that doesn't get as much play as other factors, it seems anyway, and that is the circumstances in Australia with those horrible wildfire problems that they've had down there. That has definitely impeded their beef production. They're a major competitor in the Asian market in particular with U.S. beef, so that could be a lingering impact to the good of U.S. beef interests, could it not?
That's exactly right. The Australians have suffered under really several years of drought. They had a bit of relief and an attempted rebuilding, but it preempted by more severe drought in 2018, 2019. The wildfires that we see that have been so prominent the last couple of months are really the result of that. So, Australia is at about a 30-year low in cattle numbers. Their ability to produce beef is restricted. Their ability to export is restricted, therefore. Current forecasts from USDA would suggest that the U.S. is liable to overtake Australia slightly to be the number 3 beef exporting country in 2020, just a little bit ahead of Australia.
And we haven't mentioned yet the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement, which is now soon to be in place anyway, fully. So, again, looking at that and the fact that Mexico and Canada and the U.S. do great business in this area, is there any reason to think we'll see anything beyond the norm in trade activity between the countries moving forward then?
Well, I think it mostly just kind of removes the uncertainty we've had about that. It is important. Both Canada and Mexico are very important trading partners for beef. In a very integrated sense, we have bilateral flows of beef, both imports and exports, as well as cattle that we mostly import from the two countries. And so really the USMCA just sort of reinforces that trade relationship that has developed over time. And I don't know that I expect to see major changes as a result of the new agreement, but certainly less volatility perhaps in that market and a little less uncertainty about the way we will continue that trading relationship.
Well, I want to get into one other subject here with you, and you put a write-up together on this recently, and it's looking at our hay supplies and the potential for hay prices in 2020. We're coming off of a rather productive year, certainly in the Central Plains, because of ample moisture. How does that look currently in this area and more broadly, Derrell?
Well, the hay situation is a little bit of a up and down situation. Kind of depends on where you are. Kind of depends on sort of how you look at it. We did have lots of moisture last year in many cases. Overall, hay production was up a little bit last year in the U.S., more in some regions than others. And in other cases, too much moisture was actually an issue relative to quality. We don't have a lot of data on the quality side, but certainly what you hear in the country is a lot of variability in quality. So overall, hay supplies were up a little bit. Regionally, hay supplies were up pretty sharply in the Southern Plains, Central Plains area. And so it would appear on average that we have adequate hay stocks. Yet despite that, I think some producers are probably noticing some regional shortages. And again, some of these quality variations, a little bit poorer quality hay is probably impacting hay use and overall management of the cattle herd in terms of managing nutrition this winter.
So is that to say, as we look ahead, that prices for better quality hay might be to the upside a bit?
I think that's right. In fact, in general, we expect slightly higher prices, not a lot, 2 to 4% perhaps on an average basis, but good quality hay from both a beef and especially from a dairy demand standpoint will be in very much in demand. And so I would look for stronger prices, particularly for that better quality hay.
All right, something to think about for our producers as they look forward. Well, we leave folks with this. We're very pleased to note that you will be right here in Manhattan roughly a month from now. You're in the lineup of speakers at Cattlemen's Day 2020 at Kansas State University, bringing some thoughts on the markets at that time, right?
I'm looking forward to the opportunity to be there, and I'm going to put together a presentation and explore, in particular, these rapidly evolving global beef markets and, the challenges as well as the potential that the U.S. Sees in those markets in the coming years.
Well, we are definitely looking forward to that presentation again at Cattlemen's Day, Kansas State University. Just a note here, that is on Friday, March the 6th. Plan to be at Weber Hall and Arena to hear from Derrell and others at that event. And Derrell, as always, thanks for your comments right here.
You bet. Happy to do it.
Derrell Peel is a livestock economist out of Oklahoma State University. You're on Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today, 800-321-3276, or visit us online, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions. Agriculture Today continues now, and yes, we're into that season that you cow-calf producers with spring calving herds await and hopefully prepare for. Calving season for many of you. We bring by once again A.J. Tarpoff. He's a beef veterinarian, K-State Research and Extension. A.J. has been on the circuit last several weeks conducting those calving schools around and about Kansas, which are very well attended. And we'll do here sort of what you do there at those, AJ, and that is go over some basic reminders about getting ready for the calving season, right?
That's right. So these are some quick little reminders to be able to go through, and this is our preemptive strike. If you haven't started calving yet, now is the time to start thinking about it. And I think that's very important. What we'll talk about today is a little bit less technical, but these are some good reminders, good things to get prepared, to think about, to repair, to rebuy, to purchase, to have a discussion about. These are all some pretty good reminders.
And you start with record keeping in as far as calving successes from the past and helping you plan for this calving season now.
Planning ahead for records, about every rancher I've ever met keeps their records a little bit differently. It may be something as simple as an ear tag and how many ear tags and how they coordinate with the cow. Calving books are a phenomenal tool to be able to have, a little pocket book that we can write down who calved, when they calved, male or female, the calf coming out. There's a lot of different things that we may be able to capture, data we can capture to make better decisions within our herd. Simple things. A lot of what we can write down about our calving tells us what happened several months ago during breeding season. Okay, so having a basic record system, I think, is very important during calving season. It keeps us on track of any problem cows if they've had issues before in the past. It's good information we can refer back to later on.
But as we always talk of, AJ, having the proper tools and equipment on hand for calving assistance when necessary.
Absolutely. So calving assistance, early neonatal care, when the calf hits the ground. So my calving box, so to speak, is I really like to use a cooler. Okay, it's like, well, why do you have all your calving stuff in a cooler? Well, it's an easy to grab tote, and 2, it'll keep things from freezing. Okay, especially during some of the cold days, cold nights, we may be out working. We can bring that calving box inside, the calving tote, which is actually a cooler. We can have everything nice and warm, ready to go in the morning. We can close that up, and we know it's not going to freeze. Inside my cooler kit, what are some of the things I like to carry around with me? Number 1 is either calving chains, OB chains, or OB straps. Okay, the nylon straps, little metal rings, either or. I don't have a preference on what you use, but what I do care about is to making sure that they are in good condition. If the calving chains, if they've started to rust, if you run your hand through that chain, if there's any kink in the chain, if there is any sharp spots or any burrs, it's time to replace those. They don't last forever, and that's okay. The straps themselves, if they start to get frayed, if they're starting to lose some of their integrity, if it's becoming very difficult to clean them, it's time to get those replaced. I like to have multiple sets on hand because sometimes we might have to deal with multiple calvings in a row. Want to make sure I use clean equipment, especially those calving straps that may go on the inside of the cow. After I use them, I will clean them. I will try to disinfect them with some type of iodine solution or chlorhexidine solution. I hang them up to dry overnight. Now, whenever they are dried, I do like to put them into an enclosed container so I don't recontaminate them by accident. I like to use Ziploc bags or a little Rubbermaid tote that is nice and closed, throw them right back in the calving cooler. So that's kind of my progression of that equipment. Other pieces that I'll keep in the calving tote. You may have to use handles, okay, OB handles to be able to attach to the chains or the straps themselves. Gloves, okay, OB gloves. We need to think about our cleanliness as well, making sure that we're keeping everything clean, making sure that there's no issues there. I do like to have a box of gloves in there. The next thing is lube. Lubrication for every single calving. It makes everything go much simpler. It decreases the friction of that calf coming through the birth canal, decreases any of the inflammation post-calving with the cow. So I routinely lubricate every calving I'm going to intervene with. However, having lubricant around, we sometimes worry about it freezing. And that's one of the main reasons why I moved to a calving cooler, is to keep my lubricant warm during the day. And then just oddball things. We can have a little bit of disinfectant in there. We can have some towels. I like to use big old beach towels, something that I can wrap a calf in if I need to dry it off. So these are all things that I'll have in my calving kit.
One needs to be cognizant of other things too here, AJ, though, and that would be the facility, the location in which they intend to calve those cows or heifers. Once again, sanitation is important there, but those areas need to function well in as far as moving animals.
Yeah, operating, okay? They need to be operationally ready. If you have a barn, if you have a head catch, if you have a calving area, chances are you haven't been back to those areas for about a year. Okay, so now is the time to go have a really hard look, if you haven't started calving yet, on your facilities or any other pieces of equipment you may have to use during calving season. If there are broken welds on your calving chute or your head catch, if you need to repair, replace springs, latches, gate handles, now is the time. The other big tool is if you use a calf puller, making sure that it is still free and ready to use. It's operating like it should. It's another piece of equipment to take a good hard look at, and if something needs to be replaced or fixed, now is the time.
Now, in preparing for trouble and that is any problems that might arise, be it scours, be it something else. You advocate having treatment products ready for deployment if necessary.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. In a lot of these cases, we may see a critical situation that needs addressed immediately. To be preemptive about that, to be prepared for some of those situations that may or may not occur, go have a conversation with your veterinarian. That all starts with your local practitioner that you have a very good working relationship with them. Go have that conversation. It's, Doc, what do I need? Okay, I'm just getting ready to start calving. What products might I need, or what situations may I have to treat for? They can prescribe some of those products. They may be able to set you up to be a little bit more prepared. That could take a lot of different looks. It could be colostrum, okay? If you need to replace some of the colostrum that calf may not have gotten from mom, they may, recommend certain types of colostrum products for those newborn calves. Other neonatal calf, issues, okay? Whether it's scours, septicemia, hypothermia, they get really cold. Having a plan in place to be able to treat and control some of those situations on farm is being very proactive. We can't forget about the cow either. We may have to treat certain conditions post-calving, whether they have some swelling from the calving itself, or if they have condition like a retained placenta, okay, or metritis, which is an infection of the uterus post-calving. So any of these conditions, they do show up and they do happen during calving season. So being proactive, having a plan in place, and understanding and having that relationship with your veterinarian that you're prepared to handle and treat those situations.
All right. Well, a couple of other things to add to the story here. And this is a step that's been advocated for a number of years now, and you actually endorse it as well, to encourage calving in more favorable conditions, that is, not at midnight or 1 a.m. The timing of feeding heading up to calving time can affect that.
It can. It's a lot of people say there's no such thing as a free lunch. Well, that's true, but this is one tool, one management strategy that we have that does reliably work, and we don't have to put any extra effort in. If we feed cattle, okay, later into the evening, right around dusk, if that's where we feed them the bulk of their feed, and it usually works better when we're feeding a fibrous, more of a hay-based product, not as much with concentrate or protein, but if we're rolling out hay, if we give that later into the evening, we will have more calves born during daylight hours.
And that's not just tail. That's been proven through research.
There's been several research studies that do show reliable results that a higher percentage of animals are born during daylight hours when we feed in the late evening hours.
So something relatively simple that you can do to make your calving season that much easier on you and your personnel. Another thing that you suggest, too, as folks are tagging those calves, maybe additional early processing of those calves could be conducted at the same time.
We have some management that all of our cow-calf operations deal with. Castration of our male animals. If these are not animals that we're going to be keeping back for breeding stock, when we do a management procedure like castration or dehorning for some operations, the longer that we wait, the more stressful it is on those calves. Okay, so if we are already handling those animals within the first day of life, we can use the elastrator bands. Out in the open, if you're worried about dehorning, they actually have butane torch dehorners that we can actually disbud and remove that horn even before it starts to grow. Okay, so we can do all of these procedures day one. Now, one thing I will warn about castration: if you're going to use elastrator bands at birth, make sure you count to 2. We do need to make sure that both testicles are down into the scrotum before we administer that band.
Right. Well, a number of things that our cow-calf producers can check off as they think about preparation for calving season and being as ready as possible to maximize those calving opportunities and to assure that there are no difficulties. And AJ, we appreciate the comments as always. Thank you.
Thank you.
Beef veterinarian A.J. Tarpoff, K-State Research and Extension, with some preparatory thoughts. As you enter your calving season, cow-calf producers, if you're not there already, you're listening to Agriculture Today. We'll be back on the K-State Radio Network.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
Agriculture Today continues now on the K-State Radio Network. Eric Atkinson with you, and with today's agricultural news headlines for you now, courtesy in part of DTN. At the 2020 Cattle Industry Convention last week in San Antonio, analysts brought mostly positive market news for all segments of the industry. Longtime analyst Kevin Good of CattleFacts presented a supply and demand outlook that featured a move to a demand-driven beef market, as well as positive export projections, both supporting upturns in price and increased market share. The beef cow inventory was projected down for 2020 by 375,000 head and flat for 2021. Steer and heifer slaughter projected up by 250,000 head this year. Exports were anticipated to climb by 5% this year. Imports of beef to the U.S. projected to drop by 5%. U.S. per capita consumption of all protein was projected up, beef reaching 58.4 pounds in 2020. Beef is expected to continue to get a bigger piece of consumer spending at 48%, while pork is at 22% and poultry at 9%. And their average price projections for the remainder of 2020 on a per hundredweight basis: $120 for fed cattle, $150 for a 750-pound steer, $170 for a 550-pound steer calf, and $65 on a utility cow. Bred females were expected to average $1,500 per head. Now, the CEO of CattleFacts, Randy Block, wrapped up the outlook with a few longer-range thoughts, saying that the U.S. beef industry has turned the corner from being a supply-driven market with a boom and bust cycle to a demand-driven market. As a result, he says, industry profitability is expected for all segments of the beef industry this year. Because the industry is demand-driven, he notes the importance of being proactive on issues including traceability, sustainability, and food safety to be sure U.S. ranchers don't lose access to those markets. Consumers, he stressed, consider all of these areas as valuable contributors. Senate Agriculture Committee Ranking Member Debbie Stabenow released an updated report alleging inequities in payments from the USDA's Market Facilitation Program. She said the data show a bias in payments toward large and southern farms on a per-acre basis. Stabenow argued the MFP's relaxed payment and eligibility limits, as she called them, have benefited large farms and foreign companies at the expense of smaller and beginning farmers. A USDA spokesperson disputed those findings, telling Politico that farms with less than 100 acres received an average of $55.90 per acre, while farms with more than 2,500 acres received an average $47.51 per acre. The spokesperson also emphasized that MFP payments are made based on trade damage and not on other factors. It's not clear how the new U.S.-China trade deal will influence tomorrow's USDA World Supply and Demand forecasts. Here's more from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
How much will the new China trade deal play into USDA's upcoming forecasts for supply, demand, and prices of various major farm commodities?
Certainly, our forecasts will consider that agreement in force, but lots of buts. USDA's acting outlook chairman Mark Jekanowski says it's hard to know how much the agreement should contribute. Number one, the publicly available purchase commitment numbers only give an overall dollar number, not any breakout by commodity. We don't have access to that information if it does exist.
Number two, the overall dollar figure commitments in the deal likely cover varied ag products, not just the major ones for which USDA does supply-demand forecasting. And number three,
our analyses are based on market conditions. And in fact, even within the agreement, it states pretty clearly that the purchases will be made based on market conditions and market needs.
And it's still not clear what those conditions or needs are and how they might be affected in China by the coronavirus situation. So Tuesday's USDA forecasts are going to be interesting. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
And the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is proposing to conduct a long-term study of flood risk in the lower Missouri River Basin after receiving formal letters of intent from officials in Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, and Missouri, offering to help partially fund what would be about a $400,000 project. Devastating flooding along the 735-mile expanse of the lower basin has been a significant problem for years now. Corps of Engineers Public Affairs Chief David Kolarek told DTN the proposal awaits funding approval. Kolarek said the Corps of Engineers has submitted a budget request for the flood risk management study for fiscal year 2020. If funded, that study would formulate and evaluate measures to reduce flood risk, damages, vulnerability, and to improve the infrastructure resilience along the lower Missouri Basin. On now we go to this week's edition of Tree Tales. Here's K-State forester Charlie Barden. Charlie?
March and April is the typical prescribed burning season here in Kansas, and an average year about 2 million acres are burned in the Flint Hills region alone. But with last summer's abundant precipitation, the grass growth was especially vigorous, which results in a heavy fuel load to carry more intense fires. I have already seen several small wildfires this month on highway rights-of-way, probably started from discarded cigarettes. One even threatened a residential subdivision on Highway 24 in Pottawatomie County. So please be careful and make sure cigarettes are completely extinguished. Many ranchers use prescribed fire as an essential management tool for maintaining healthy tallgrass prairie. Fire can be a cost-effective method of brush control and also reinvigorates the growth of the grasses and improves cattle grazing, wildlife habitat, and the vigor and diversity of the wildflowers and other plants unique to this wonderful ecosystem. However, fire can also have a negative effect on the air quality of downwind communities, sometimes many miles from Kansas. When the conditions are just right, concentrated burning of the prairie in April in Kansas can cause urban areas several states away in Minnesota or even Tennessee to have their ozone detectors go off as concentrations of that pollutant exceed allowable levels set by the EPA. The burning that many rural homeowners do to prepare their gardens or to remove dead grass growth from roadside ditches and small prairie patches is not allowed in Flint Hills counties during the month of April, so that smoke from these fires does not add to the smoke from the essential burning of the prairie. This regulation affects burning of construction residue, brush piles, and even firefighter training burns are also restricted. A simple solution is to burn these areas early in the year, like in February or March. You can learn much more about the Flint Hills Smoke Management Plan and the current regulations by going to the website ksfire.org. That is spelled ksfire.org. Local regulations also vary, so be sure to check with your local authorities, too, to see if a burn permit is required in your area. You've been listening to Tree Tales. I'm Charles Barden, forester with K-State Research and Extension.
Thanks, Charlie. Jeff Wickman will be in with this week's 4-H segment next. We'll hear more there about the upcoming Science of Agriculture Challenge. This is Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128-plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local Extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
This is Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. Kansas 4-H youth and adult volunteers are encouraged to participate in 2 separate trainings this year. The first is for the Science of Agriculture Challenge. The second is for the My Preparedness Initiative. Kansas 4-H Extension Specialist Anissa Jepsen joins us to discuss both training opportunities. And this is a couple of things to cover today, starting with the Science of Agriculture Challenge. That is something that is kind of around the corner in terms of getting registered.
That's right. This is the 3rd year for the Kansas 4-H Science of Agriculture Challenge. And right now is the perfect time for coaches to be lining up teams. The final team registration ends on April 15th. Coaches can attend a webinar, or people that are interested in being coaches can attend a webinar on February 13th at 7 p.m. We have information about that on our website. This is a really great opportunity for youth to identify needs within their own communities in regards to STEM and agriculture, and then come up with some solutions to those questions. And they all do this in partnership with an adult mentor.
So how many are on a team then?
Teams can range from 3 to 5 members. You have to have completed 6th grade. So what the teams do are they're guided with the help of their coach to identify issues or problems within their community in relationship to agriculture. So once they define a problem, then they'll work on a solution to understand that problem. In the past, we've had teams that had identified a problem with feeding livestock. And so they had created kind of a system to make sure that they could watch how the rations within the livestock are fed. We've had teams that have identified the loss of agriculture in the classrooms. And so they had identified some curriculum that they might be able to use and provide education to youth, younger youth in classrooms.
They're not only identifying the problem, they're coming up with the solution.
Right. They're coming up with a solution, which they then present in a 20-minute presentation to a judges panel and are judged on not only their problem solution, but also their communication skills and things like that. The other really great part of this competition is the Community Engagement Award, and we're really going to be ramping that up this year with extra scholarship money available to youth. And that award is where you go out and make sure that you're sharing what you're doing with your community. You can do that through radio interviews such as this or Facebook posts. You can do speaking engagements at community partners. That is really sharing what you're doing.
And that outreach is really important.
It is. It is. It's important for us not only to share what we're doing in 4-H, but also to share what we're doing in the name of agriculture, and that we do have youth that are really interested in finding solutions to combat some of the problems that we're going to be facing in the next few years about food source and things like that.
And how long do the teams have to not only identify the problem, but come up with a solution?
So the teams are formed in April, the final. They can actually, a team could start meeting now. They started meeting in January 1st if they wanted to. They need to have their preliminary presentation ready that last Friday of the fair. That will be September 18th this year. Our fair is a little later. And then they need to have their final presentation for the competition November 14th.
And as you were saying, there is scholarship dollars in play here.
There is. We have in the past had sponsorship from various partners. The 4-H Foundation is great in helping us find people that really want to support this project, and those youth are earning those scholarship dollars to apply to their education.
And as you said, the webinar is this month, and then that'll kind of help them get the coaches lined up?
Yes. So that will help answer any specific questions. It'll give guidelines to how to identify a project, how to find other mentors in your community that can help the youth. And it's really important to know that you don't have to be the expert. We want the youth to really dive in and identify a problem, and then we want them to work through the solutions. So you're really there as a mentor to help kind of navigate that for them.
Another thing that's important, and it's something that is also involving 4-H youth, and that is the My Preparedness Initiative. And this is really based around disaster preparedness.
Yeah, so this is a really exciting project that started at Mississippi State Extension. It's My PI. It is a program that allows for youth to become more active participants in the case of disaster. In 4-H, we talk a lot about making sure that youth are able to have a voice, to be able to be a part of a community. And this My PI program really allows them to do that. We are looking for adults, again, to serve as mentors within this project area. They would attend a training May 6th through the 8th in Wichita that is put on by the Mississippi State folks. They come up into Kansas and train. Then instructors will go back to their communities. They will partner with other people within their communities to create a training curriculum using the My PI curriculum. 12 to 24 hours, the youth will participate in various hands-on learning experiences. And then the youth are asked to go back and train 6 other families so that they can also be prepared for a disaster.
So what kind of training are they getting? I'm assuming they're not going to be doing a lot of triage type stuff. What kind of things will they be doing?
So this model is based on the CERT model, which is Community Emergency Response Team. So really what we're asking youth to do, if there were a tornado, which we know happen quite frequently in Kansas, they would have a disaster preparedness kit. They would be able to immediately, before first responders got on scene, maybe they would have some bandages or some things in case there was something. They would have water. They would know not to touch down power lines. They would be able to instruct others to be safe until the first responders. We're definitely not training them to be first responders, but we're training them to work kind of along beside a first responder or before the first responder arrives on scene.
This is something that really seems to be catching on in 4-H, especially is the train-the-trainer concept. How does that work and how successful has it been?
This program specifically, we are one of the last states in the FEMA zone. So I believe there's 7 to 8 states in the FEMA zone, and we are the last state. So this is a nationwide program. So it's really been successful in all the other states. Our partners in Nebraska have been helping guide us along this. So we're definitely not jumping in blind. We know what we're getting into. And it's just been a really good opportunity to look and see how teens can be active in what they're doing. We also are really encouraging adults not to have to be the expert, that they're going out and helping find partners within your community, and then they're going in to train those participants. And it's easier for us to be able to offer programs when we're able to do the train-the-trainer model.
And how can they find out more information about this program?
So this program, you would need to email me at ajepsen, AJEPSEN at ksu.edu. We will have some information on our website once the training gets live. Also, it's a good time to talk to your local county extension office to see if they've heard anything about it and maybe partner with them. We just are really excited about it and want to hopefully get 12 instructors at that Train the Trainer.
That's Kansas 4-H Extension Specialist Anissa Jepsen. For more information on the Science of Agriculture Challenge and the My Preparedness Initiative, contact your local county or district extension office or visit kansas4h.org. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.